Hello. Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Hassan, board certified physiatrist and independent practice owner. I help physiatrists start and grow their own independent practice so they can achieve financial independence and live without limits. Welcome to the Rehab Roundup. Welcome back to those of you who attended last week, and welcome to those of you who are new to the segment. Today, we want to talk about the hidden cost of overhead. Overhead is huge. In every business, they have overhead costs. And basically, those overhead costs impact revenue. And how that pertains to you as a physician is the amount of revenue a business is able to generate is basically what they're going to use to pay you. So if their overhead costs are such that they're extremely high and it cuts into their revenue, that is going to translate into decreasing the amount of money you get paid or the money you can make. So overhead costs are hugely important to any type of medical practice and any type of doctor. So it's going to be very important to know what the overhead costs are. So some examples of overhead costs are the EMR. All right. So most hospitals have an electronic medical record that they keep medications, vital signs, x-ray results, all these different things, and there's a cost to that. So the cost of the EMR is definitely put into that category of overhead cost. The staff to run the actual hospital, that's an overhead cost as well. Equipment, be that x-ray machines, ultrasounds, you name it, that's an overhead cost that's going to hit those books, translate into cutting into that revenue, and as a result, decreasing or potentially decreasing the amount of money that you can make or will be paid. Scheduling system for your outpatient practices, that's an overhead cost. The actual billers and coders, they're the ones that are going to get you the money, but it costs for them to do that job, and as a result, that's overhead. So if we're talking about brick and mortar buildings, the land that hospital on and that lease, hospital or office or what have you, that's an overhead cost. We want to talk about the lights. We got to have lights, illumination to run this whole thing. That's going to be a cost as well. Water, gas, telephone, your fax machines, printers, all these different things can be put into that category of overhead. And if you think about all this different stuff, that adds up. And as a result, that's going to be a hefty expense that could potentially cut into those revenues. And again, like I talked about before, translate into you potentially being paid less. So if we have these overhead costs, I know the next question is, hey, how do we figure out what these overhead costs are? Sometimes this can be a daunting and difficult task because some practices or hospitals aren't necessarily going to be upfront and let you know, hey, here's a list of our overhead costs that will potentially impact your salary. So you got to be a savvy doc, and sometimes MGMA is a resource that you can kind of tap into and see if they can give you an idea of maybe average overhead costs or overhead costs for a particular practice setting that may be similar to the one that you're entertaining. You can ask other physicians. If you have relationships with administrators at other facilities, you may be able to tap into them. Google is a great resource. You can type that into Google, see what information comes up, but you definitely want to do your due diligence and do your research, and as much as possible figure out what the potential overhead costs are that could potentially impact you. And you want to think about what practices have overhead costs, that's all practices across the board. That's your academic centers, private practices, so forth and so on. Everybody is going to have some type of overhead cost. So you want to figure out what that is because it has a huge impact on you. So when we talk about overhead costs, I would assume, are going to ask how much is too much, what's the average cost, so forth and so on. I think a good sweet spot is about 15%. You can find some practices that are a little less. These are your independent practices that are more virtual, where they take care of pretty much everything, or their facility or hospital provides a lot of that stuff at no cost to them. And then there are some that charge 30% or higher. When we're talking about 30% or higher, that to me is getting into that realm of that's way too much. You always want to figure out what the cost benefit ratio. There may be some instances where some of the things that they give you from an overhead perspective are okay. But again, like when we start to get to that 30% and higher, that is really going to impact how much revenue you can generate or how much you're going to get paid. So you definitely want to take a close look at that cost because it may cost you. Other things you want to think about in terms of overhead is really just, is it worth it, or why? Is it something that they really need to charge you for? Is it something that may actually need to be included at no cost to you? Some of these things you can potentially find in your contract. So having a healthcare attorney to really take a close look at that contract, review it, and figure out if they kind of put some of that overhead cost and transfer that onto you is going to be important as well. So I think the gist of this Facebook Live today is there are hidden costs to overhead that could potentially negatively impact you from a financial standpoint. So you want to be a smart doc, do your research, ask them. It never hurts to ask. All they can say is no. And if they do say no, you have other avenues, Facebook, Google, MGMA. You can ask other practice managers and figure out what are some of the average overhead costs or some of the overhead costs for similar types of practices, and then really do your calculations to figure out, okay, if their overhead costs are X, how's that going to impact you? So hopefully this was helpful and high yield. That's what I want to bring to you, are helpful high yield business tips that help you on your journey to independence. I'm going to throw a link to my scheduling platform in the comments. So if you're interested in getting on a free 15-minute strategy session so we can talk about all things the business of rehab, please go to that scheduling link, get set up. Hey, Dr. Dietrich, thank you for joining in. Get set up so we can talk about it, really get you on that path to financial independence and freedom, because things have changed. And I think it's an ideal time for physicians to really take back medicine. If we take back medicine, and are able to practice on our own terms, that's really going to help out our patients. I think a lot of physicians right now are kind of dissatisfied with how healthcare is going. You have CEOs of insurance companies who are making tens of millions of dollars, but they aren't the ones on the front line taking care of the patients, dealing with all the things that come up, helping patients to get better, get back to their prior level of function, all these different things. So we really got to take back ownership, and I think that's going to be good for the healthcare system as a whole, and especially for the physicians, because we spend a lot of time getting this education, going through residency, because we had a passion for patients, a passion for medicine, and medicine as a business has really taken that passion away from us. So I want to give that passion back to you guys. Put medicine back in the hands of physicians, because it's going to do nothing but help us. So this is Rehab Roundup. I am Dr. Hassan, board certified physiatrist and independent practice owner. I help physiatrists start and grow their own independent practices so they can live without limits. And you can definitely follow me on Facebook. This is a platform I use to do my lives and give you the business tips. Again, like I said before, I'm going to drop that link to the scheduling platform in the comment section. So sign up for that free 15-minute strategy session so we can talk about business and get you on the right path. Tune in next week. We're going to be doing this 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Next week, we're going to talk about basically how to market yourself and get yourself out there to really drive business and create business for yourself. So thank you guys for tuning in. Look forward to talking to you next week, and I'll drop that scheduling link. You all have a good night.